Hey everybody, Robb Ryerse, and it is Tuesday, which means this is the Vote Common Good Politics podcast. We're here to talk politics. Our fearless leader, Doug Padgett, is away this week, scouting out sites and opportunities that are going to be a part of the Vote Common Good sponsored bike ride, We the People. It's bringing attention to immigration and border issues and dealing with those from the perspective of the common good, and it's something that we're looking forward to. You can find out more about on the Vote Common Good website, votecommongood.com, and encourage you to do that. So Doug's away, taking care of that and getting ready for the big bike ride this fall, and so I am here today with Dan Deitrich, who is producer Dan, but he's so much more. How are you today, Dan?
I'm doing well. Yeah, it's starting to warm up here in South Bend, and so I have this super loud air conditioning out here in the studio, and I have to turn it off for recording. And so if you see me start to sweat during the recording, it's because I'm dying.
That's fantastic. I'm one of those people that just sweats all the time. I can sweat
low
sitting
level
still.
of sweat. All
That's
the time.
right. Exactly. Are you speaking of sweating, Dan, are you planning on going on the bike ride?
I am planning on being present at the bike ride. I'm not sure how much of that I'm going to log on a bike, but I am going to be down there on the border, at least for part of it. And with Doug's persuasive powers, I'm sure I'm going to end up on a bike at some point. But
yeah.
How about you?
Yeah, I was no, I have very little desire. I participated in last year in the Vote Common Good sponsored march from Charlottesville, Virginia to Washington, D.C. It was a march to highlight the need for a reckoning about America's and the church's past and present and future related to racial injustice. And it was an amazing experience walking the 114 miles or so from Charlottesville to Washington, D.C. But it almost killed me. And I had just 3 weeks before I had a bone spur removed from the top of my foot. And because I actually have bone spurs as opposed to that former guy.
Lesser men would have let a bone spur, keep you from walking or doing anything meaningful. But.
Exactly. So I had this bone spur removed, and then I didn't give much thought to this other than Doug told me to be in Charlottesville on this particular date, and we were going to walk from Charlottesville to DC. And I was like, okay. And I had given very little thought to it other than that. And then, you walk 14 miles a day or so, and you suddenly realize I probably should have prepared for this. And so I imagine I'll spend some time on the bike tour as well. Though my wife Vanessa told me this weekend that she really wants to go and participate. So, I might have to stay home and, hold down the fort while she rides a bike from San Diego to St. Augustine, which is going to be really cool. So encourage everybody to check that out and to take a look at the Vote Common Good website to learn all about We the People riding our bikes for border justice. So Dan, I thought today I'd love to have a conversation about political transformation and how people go through political transformations and how that's worked. But before we do that, we got to talk about some news, right? We've got to talk. There's some stuff that's in the news that I just feel like I've got to talk to somebody about this stuff. I mean, can we start with Marjorie Taylor Greene?
Yeah.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene feels to me like the bizarro AOC.
And I think
when
she would enjoy that comparison. I feel like she
yeah,
wants to be equals, rivals, arch nemesis, like she feeds off that.
yeah, and my goodness. So this past week there was footage that surfaced of her kind of stalking AOC's office. I think this was before she was elected to Congress, thankfully. But it really was this unsettling, disturbing kind of video of her and a couple of, probably people that participated in the insurrection, flipping open the mail slot on Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez's office door and yelling into it. It's just behavior that is unbecoming of the capital of the United States and unbecoming of someone who serves as a congressperson in the capital of the United States. And I think, I think there's probably some personality elements here of like, this is kind of the way she is. But I wonder too, how much of this is rooted in a conservative ideology that says that government is bad, and the federal government in particular has been painted as evil really since the days of Ronald Reagan, and in the 40 years since then, conservatives have had this drumbeat that the federal government is evil, the federal government is evil, the federal government is evil. So if something's evil, you don't treat it with any respect. You disrespect the people who are serving, and you disrespect the building because, why shouldn't you? Because it's evil. And I wonder how much of this stuff is kind of rooted in that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's definitely behavior that is unbecoming of a sitting congressperson, but it would be poor behavior if my kids did it, if they yelled into the mail slot of a congressperson's office. Like, this is not okay under any scenario.
Don't do that. Yeah, exactly. So the other reason Marjorie Taylor Greene has been in the news is because she compared mask mandates to the Holocaust.
Yeah, I have the quote right here in case folks haven't heard it. She says, and I quote, we can look back at a time in history where people were told to wear a gold star, and they were definitely treated like second-class citizens, so much so that they were put in trains and taken to gas chambers in Nazi Germany, Greene said at the time. And this is exactly the type of abuse that Nancy Pelosi is talking about. End quote. What do you even do with that?
It's just. Wait a minute. What?
It's so horrifying, the comparison. All you can do is laugh at this point, because otherwise you just cry and fall into despair at this state of things.
Yeah. And the feckless, gutless leadership that could exercise a little bit of influence and accountability for Marjorie Taylor Greene. Particularly, I'm talking about minority leader, and I love saying minority leader, Kevin McCarthy. He tweeted about an hour ago saying, Marjorie's wrong. But, come on, a tweet is not repercussions for saying something so horribly stupid. And she certainly is free to say it, but she's also free to experience the consequences of saying something so remarkably stupid. The kind of behavior and speech we have seen from Marjorie Taylor Greene, whether it's yelling into the mail slot of AOC's office, or chasing AOC, yelling at her off the floor of the House chamber, if you saw that report, or saying something like this, comparing mask mandates to the Holocaust. This is the kind of behavior and and conversation that gets you fired in any other workplace. Right? Like any place in corporate America, any workplace, this kind of behavior, accosting a coworker, saying things that are ridiculously stupid, and putting your employer's reputation on the line as a result of that. This is the kind of stuff that gets you fired, and yet no consequences for her. And you know what that means? That means she's just going to be more emboldened to keep doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah. And when she's called out, she says, "Oh, I never compared it to the Holocaust. Only the discrimination against Jews in early Nazi years." No, we read the quote. You said they were put on trains and taken to gas chambers, and this is exactly the type of abuse that Nancy Pelosi is talking about. You can't walk this one back. It's just...
Yeah. How long is it until we have a Vote Common Good podcast entitled "This Gal's Got to Go"? And I say that because Doug and I used to have a podcast called "This Guy's Got to Go," where we would just spend an hour and a half ranting about Donald Trump. So much so,
all the reasons.
Yeah, yes. And often did not get to all the reasons that there are to rant about Donald Trump. But I remember once my daughter came downstairs and she was real kind of skittish and quiet. And I was like, "Well, what's going on?" She's like, "Oh, I thought you and Mom were fighting. I heard yelling." And I was like, "No, I was just doing a podcast. You just ranting about Donald Trump." So I feel like, Marjorie Taylor Greene is on track to having her own podcast devoted to her. But, from the ridiculous to the sublime, or to the more ridiculous, the latest person who is being threatened with cancellation by conservatives is none other than Richard Marx. Now, Richard Marx is, as far as I know, no relation to Karl Marx. Richard Marx is best known as being the soundtrack of Summer Love when I was a teenager. Richard Marx is best known for writing the anthem of long distance summer camp relationships. Right Here Waiting, maybe, one of the top 10 greatest songs ever written.
Bold statement.
That is a bold statement, but I'm going to stand by it. And listen, I love Richard Marx enough that I follow Richard Marx on Instagram. Do you know who Richard Marx is married to, producer Dan? Do you know this?
No, I did not.
How old are you, Dan?
I'm 37.
You might be just a hair young for this. Richard Marx is married to Daisy Fuentes, which there's a Gen X, mind-boggling thing happening there with those two together. Yeah. So anyways, Richard Marx is about to be canceled, not for writing cheesy love songs, but because he tweeted that he would love to buy a beer or two or three or four or how many ever for the guy who lives next door to Rand Paul. And I think this tweet is an old tweet, but it was, if you remember a couple of years ago, Senator from Kentucky, Rand Paul, was assaulted by one of his neighbors, a serious situation. And Richard Marx, tweets out this kind of, amusing, clearly a joke, I'd love to buy this guy a beer, kind of thing. And now, I don't know if you saw the news yesterday, Rand Paul received some mail that included a death threat, included an image of a rifle pointed at his head, and included some white powder, which was, some, question, is this anthrax? Is this, what is this? And clearly, very concerning, that anyone would receive that. Certainly that a sitting United States senator would receive that, not anything we condone at all. But conservative Twitter, Republican Twitter, is blaming all of this on Richard Marx.
That's a real leap.
Richard Marx is to blame for inciting violence against Rand Paul, and the guy, best known for Endless Summer Nights, right here waiting is about to be canceled for inciting violence against potential violence against Rand Paul. Now, here's the crazy thing: it's just mind-boggling.
I feel like I know what you're going to say. I'm going to let you say it.
Republicans want to, have a deep investigation into the ties between Richard Marx's tweet and whoever sent a threatening letter to Rand Paul, but they don't want to investigate an insurrection against the United States Capitol that literally put their own lives at risk. They're like,
yeah. In this case, they'll say, words have meaning, and these words incited a death threat against a senator. But they won't take that logic to the words of the president directly involved in inciting a riot and an insurrection in our very capital.
That actually led to people's death.
Yeah.
Oh, these people.
Wherever you go.
You can keep going. That's one of my favorite songs. But, yeah. So, Dan, how familiar are you with NFTs? Are you into NFTs? Is this a thing that you're into?
I was initially very intrigued. It's kind of this new thing for artists to get into and put their art out via NFT, as well as other things. But
yes,
I still think it's like Beanie Babies for grown-ups. So
NFTs are non-fungible tokens. And basically, what we've got, and there's a connection between NFTs, non-fungible tokens, and cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, and I don't know. Dan, do you own any Dogecoin?
No, I own $5 of Bitcoin though.
Oh, fantastic! I have a buddy.
On an accident, but
I have a buddy who I was sitting, with, and we were chatting, and he was like, "I think I'm going to buy some Dogecoin." And I was with him when he bought some Dogecoin 2 months ago, when it was trading at like 2 cents, and he's made a lot of money over the last 2 months. We were together last week, and I was like, "Wow!"
He bought a yacht.
I wish I had bought some with him. So anyways, so there's a relationship between NFTs, non-fungible tokens, and cryptocurrency. Basically, all these people have all this cryptocurrency, but they don't have any place to spend it. They don't have anything to spend it on. So NFTs come as an opportunity to kind of spend your cryptocurrency, your Bitcoin. And what NFTs are is essentially they are a token which represents ownership of a piece of art that is out there in the world, in the digital world. Mm-hmm. So, digital art can be replicated, can be downloaded, uploaded, and it's not like a painting where there is one painting on the wall and everything else is a facsimile of that. It's a print, it's a picture, whatever. Like digital art can be replicated very, very, very easily, right? And so what the token does is it communicates who owns the original. And so the value comes in being able to say, this piece of digital art, though it may be duplicated and replicated, I am actually the owner of it. And so the NFT is essentially a symbol of ownership of digital art that's out there in the world. And it has been taken over the collecting world lately. And it might turn out that it is like Beanie Babies, something that, ultimately ends up completely worthless. Or it could be a whole new life cycle for what art collecting looks like in our country. But now I'm talking about all of this because one of the greatest videos of all time, one of the original viral videos of all time, Charlie Bit My Finger, which was, I mean, this is like one of the first videos to go
the
viral.
First viral video, yeah.
Just sold the NFT for the non-fungible token for Charlie Bit My Finger, just sold for $790,000. Somebody now owns Charlie Bit My Finger. And so like now there's this move to like, now that somebody has ownership, they're making copyright claims on it and, you know, are pulling it down all over the internet. So if you have never seen Charlie Bit My Finger, you know, you better race over to YouTube and see it before it's gone, because it is a classic in viral videos and the latest kind of thing in the NFT bubble that's taking place, which is kind of cool. Dan, do you own any NFTs now?
I do not own any NFTs. I still have a couple Beanie Babies, and I'm waiting for those to come back in value. But those are my Bitcoin. You know, the original Bitcoin.
That's good. Well, listen, I want to talk about political transformation. This is something that, you know, I throughout the course of my life, I have gone through some pretty significant transformations in what I believe and how I view the world and in my perspective and everything. A lot of those for me were theological. I grew up in very strict fundamentalism, the type of fundamentalism that, you know, I say to folks, I grew up in a denomination, a Baptist denomination, that we weren't allowed to have anything to do with the Southern Baptists because they were too liberal. Like, just to kind of put it on the spectrum of where we were. It was pretty conservative. And I have gone through a pretty radical transformation, a fundamorphosis, to coin a word.
Wow, I like that.
Yeah, it's actually the title of a book that I wrote, Fundamorphosis. Yeah, how I left fundamentalism but didn't lose my faith. And so, you know, I've been through that theologically, but I've also been through it politically, where, you know, I grew up in a very conservative political home, you know, strongly Republican. You know, I listened to Rush Limbaugh, and, you know, I read National Review magazine. My first dog was named Buckley after William F. Buckley. I have a dog now who's named Peggy after Peggy Noonan, who was, you know, speechwriter. And we're like, this stuff's deep. This stuff is
correct me if I'm wrong. You not only listened to Rush, you got on the show several times.
5 times. 5-time caller on the Rush Limbaugh show. First time was when I was 16. I skipped school to call into Rush's show and got on the air. I mean, I was in deep. I had a mug that said a charter member of the vast right-wing conspiracy. I mean, I was like, I was conservative, as you know, to paraphrase the Apostle Paul. I was a conservative of the conservatives, and I went through a transformation. I went through, you know, a shift in my thinking and how I view the world. And so I'm always curious about that for 2 reasons. One, because, you know, people's stories, you know, fascinate me. The other is because I often talk to people, and we often have people, you know, comment in the comments during our podcasts or in the work we do with Vote Common Good. All the time we have people saying to us, you know, I've got this family member, I've got this friend, and they're in deep with this stuff. What do I do? And what we want to do is like give them some hope that change is possible, but also temper that with, you know, like, you know, the expectations of how to deal with everything and how to talk to people and what brings about change. Now, Dan, you grew up pretty conservative too, right?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it was conservative, Republican, evangelical. It wasn't shun the Baptists because they're too liberal. But it was pretty middle of the road. I didn't know a Democrat until like late high school, and it was like discovering a unicorn lived in your town. It was like, oh my gosh, so and so's dad voted for a Democrat. It was bizarre to even know someone that wasn't conservative and Republican. And I've been trying to figure out, what came first in my transformation. Was it the theological piece or the political piece? Mm-hmm. Chicken or the egg, which led to the other? And I think it was the faith theological thing that sort of started deconstructing a lot of things about how I'd imagined my life to be.
So you're growing up. Were you or was your church very political? Like, was this something that was like, on your radar, or was it just like sanctity of human life Sunday at the end of January, and you'd get the abortion sermon, or like what was that like for you?
Yeah, it wasn't super overt. It wasn't something that I spent a lot of time thinking about. It was just the water that I swam in. It was, we had in our sanctuary, we had a 40-foot American flag that would like raise from the stage and literally obscure the stained glass window, for 4th of July and Memorial Day weekend, and just thought that was cool. And then in hindsight, you're thinking like the symbolism of that is pretty strong. Like the flag obscures the cross, but that was just life,
Yeah. It's just the water you're swimming in. That's the right way to put it. So what were there moments, what were the trigger points for you that brought about, you said kind of the faith transformation came first and maybe the politics was kind of the fruit of that. Like what was it that began to, tip things for you?
Yeah, I think it was Jesus, as Sunday school of an answer as that sounds. But every week you're reading about how Jesus loved the least of these, and there was so much hype in high school about devoting your entire life to Jesus and giving yourself to this cause. And so I took that seriously. I was like, oh, we got to do this. We've got to care for people. We've got to love people. And then I started to notice some space between, wanting to love these certain people, but no, don't help those people. Those people have to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. Like you see a lot of giving to those in need. If someone needs a coat, give them yours in the Bible. But then in Republican politics, it's like, no, that we don't give handouts. You teach a man to fish, you don't give a man a fish, which wasn't in the Bible, And so there was kind of this conflict of Jesus on one hand and sort of the pull yourself up by your bootstraps independence on the other hand that was causing conflict.
It's so interesting because, those of us who kind of have a progressive approach to faith are so often criticized by conservatives that we don't take the Bible seriously, that we don't take it seriously. We deny the Bible. We didn't, and what I have found over and over and over again is exactly what you just said, that like, no, you've come to these conclusions because I take this seriously.
Yeah.
It like, this is not a game. Like I'm reading the words of Jesus and I'm seeing, what lines up and what doesn't. And it's leading me in a direction far from where I came from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was exactly it for me. And I think the active politics definitely followed at a lag from that.
Yeah.
As I understood politics, I still identified as Republican. I voted Republican up until Obama, and that was kind of the moment of shift for me. But it took a while for my politics to realign to my theological change.
Yeah. Now, when you wrote and released Hymn for the 81%, which and people might know this, might not know this, Dan, you gotta make an NFT for Hymn for the 81%. What are you doing here, Dan?
How have I not done that yet? Oh man.
So Dan wrote a song called Hymn for the 81%, which is a reference to the 81% of white evangelicals that voted for Donald Trump in the 2016 election. And it's part worship song, part political anthem. And it's a protest song aimed at white evangelicals. But it also is a bit of a love song too. It's Richard Marx inspired, like, hey, like there needs to be a much different approach to things. Was that that was a remarkably overt political act that you took, Dan, that and that song went viral and has led to all sorts of things in your life, both good and bad, I imagine. And was that kind of your first big overtly political act, putting out that song?
It was the loudest political act, yeah, up to that point. Yeah. But I had been kind of dipping a toe in political activism for a little bit. In Michigan, where I lived, grew up, they tried to pass this RFRA, Religious Freedom Act, that would basically allow discrimination of LGBTQ people. And that was my first time, like, getting on the streets with a sign and protesting. I was still working at a very conservative church at the time and didn't really know what I was getting into. And I ended up on the front page of the local paper with like a rainbow sign. And I just remember my boss at the time calling me into the office the next Monday and being like, we got to talk about some things.
Wow. Did that result in you no longer being employed by that church?
No, my pastor at the time was really understanding and kind of had my back. He covered me from some heat from the congregation itself. And he was in favor of, like, no, we shouldn't, even if we think these things about marriage, etc., we shouldn't be discriminating against people.
Yes.
And so it seemed to me as a pretty straightforward, like, this is wrong to discriminate no matter what we believe religiously. Yeah. And thankfully my pastor agreed with that point, but he was like, maybe chill out with the signs in the paper. So.
That's interesting, because I think when people go through a bit of a political transformation, often that leads to activism, right? It so often leads to, like, it's not like a ho hum, like, well, I used to vote Republican, now I vote Democrat. It, like, so many people, when they go through this transformation, when they go through this shift, they end up getting involved. They end up doing stuff, right? And I just tapped my microphone there. I'm sorry about that. If I don't know if you'll be able to edit that out of the podcast.
Edit that out.
Yeah, there you go. But they become activists. They show up on the front page of the paper, or they put out a viral song, or they do stuff. And it's interesting, that kind of pressure to not do stuff that happens.
Yeah. Yeah,
that
there's a
subtle,
lot of
okay, can't you just keep it to yourself?
Like, great, glad you care about these people. Let's just Keep it to yourself. Stay out of the paper.
Don't want to rock the boat. Don't
Yeah.
want to make waves, all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because I think, I mean, is it that people don't have the stomach for political conversations because they know how south they can go, how quickly they can go south, how easily they can go south? And as a result of that, they're just like, I'd rather just not talk about it.
Yeah. I think it gets real messy in church quickly because money is on the line. And when you piss off big donors, all of a sudden it's a different conversation. And so that's where it gets messy real quick.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you, when you look at your own kind of political transformation and how that took place, what advice would you give somebody who's beginning to think about these things? Maybe someone who's at the early stages. Well, like what would you urge them to do?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I've been asked that question a lot since releasing that song. It's like, hey, I'm on board. How do I get my friend, my mom, my brother, my whoever, how do I help them along? Or I'm just starting on this deconstruction or transformation. What next? And I think the biggest thing is just listening to voices that are a different experience than you grew up with. And so that was a big thing for me. I remember looking at my bookshelf one day and realizing every single author on there was a white dude.
Yep.
Most of them old white dudes. And so I made an active point to buy books from people of color, indigenous authors, people that had a different lived experience from me. And I think there's a temptation to want to reach out to a person, like your one black friend, to educate you on, systemic racism. And I would say do some homework first before you put that burden on someone who's living that experience every day. So yeah, read some books, listen to some podcasts, and that'd be step one.
Yeah, getting educated is so important. I think I think you're absolutely right. I think that finding opportunities to get involved is really helpful too. And going to a protest, you find all of it. It's just a remarkable thing when you find a tribe of people that, the stuff that had been rolling around in your head and you kind of thought you were the only one.
Yeah.
And then you meet other people who think the same way, even if it's on just one particular issue. It can be this just dawning moment of like, wow. I remember, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and I'm a huge Cleveland Browns fan. Like irrationally big Cleveland Browns fan. And I've long since moved away and have lived in all sorts of different places in the country, and always retained, my fandom of the Browns. It goes deep. And I remember once I was taking my kids to a game in Cleveland, and they were younger, and we came up over this hill, and they didn't grow up in Cleveland. The only Browns fan they ever knew was me. And we come up over this hill, and after parking the car and walking towards the stadium, and we see, like, laid out in front of us are just tens of thousands of Browns fans headed into First Energy Stadium for the game. And my eldest child turned to me and said, "Dad, you're not the only one." and it was like this, like, it was like and there's that experience of when you go to an event, when you go to a protest, when you begin to show up and you realize, oh, I'm not the only one.
Right.
Like, I'm not the only one who thinks this way. I'm not the only one who has this perspective. And that can be such an encouraging thing, because so often when you go through these transformations, you lose people in the process.
Yeah, for sure.
And either you lose them altogether, or you lose the closeness of, and you lose, the opportunity to talk about stuff.
Right.
I've got family members that, man, we used to talk politics all the time, and now we don't at all, because like, we just don't want to. You just don't want to go there. And so finding some people that can be your tribe, so tremendously important. You're not alone out there in the midst of this transformation. You've got people in your community. There are people who see things the way you do. There are. You just have to find them.
Yeah. Yeah, Rob, what was the tipping point for you? What was, you were the Republican of Republicans. What nudged you? What was the first card to follow?
Yeah. I mean, for me, the theological transformation happened first for me. And then the political stuff came as a result of that. What's interesting, my wife, it's a bit opposite. And, this is certainly her story to tell, but, we adopted our third child out of the foster care system. We were pastoring a church in Michigan at the time, and became foster parents, and, had this little baby placed with us. And then about a year and a half later, we're able to adopt her. And, obviously she's been a part of our family ever since. But becoming foster parents and going through that process and learning about how many kids in the state of Michigan were in the foster care system, and learning about them being, shipped from home to home to home to home, and there not being enough, adoptive parents to find forever homes for these kids, was really, really eye-opening. And it was connected to, at the time, Michigan was trying to pass and Dan, this might have been the same thing that got you on the cover of the newspaper. I might have been in another part of the state of Michigan wrestling with this stuff. But it was right around the time that Michigan was working on passing a constitutional amendment that would, make same-sex marriage illegal and unconstitutional in Michigan. And along with that came, kind of the benefits of being married, which included the ability to adopt.
Right.
And there's kind of this realization that, like, wait a minute, there are all these kids who need homes, and there are all these same-sex couples who would love to give homes to those kids, and they're not going to be allowed.
Right.
And it was, for my wife, that was a real, a big one, kind of first domino to fall, that kind of this realization of, like, wait a minute, this approach that we've had is not working. It's not good for the kids that we claim to want to help. And, there's not much pro-life about making life miserable for these children.
Right.
And so that was a big thing that began to fall for me. It was interesting that you mentioned just reading Jesus. When I went through my own kind of faith deconstruction, my fundamorphosis, that really drove me back to Jesus. Mm-hmm. And I realized that my faith had been shaped far more by the Apostle Paul than by Jesus, and I needed to kind of recover that. And what you encounter with Jesus is someone who took responsibility for other people's healthcare. Like the very moment where I'm hearing these arguments of, like, I'm not responsible for your healthcare. I'm not responsible for your healthcare. you're responsible for yourself. And I'm reading all of these stories of Jesus taking responsibility for other people's healthcare.
Right. Yeah. All I hear when people say that is the guy asking, well, who is my neighbor?
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. Yeah. And there's another one where when Jesus heals, there's a man who's born blind, and his disciples ask him, who's to blame for this?
Mm-hmm.
Is it his parents or is it him? And there's this sense that if somebody's in need, and particularly somebody has a medical need, somebody's to blame for that.
Yeah.
And I remember several years ago, then Congressman Jason Chavez was on the news, and he was talking about how we didn't need the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, because if people just stopped buying the new iPhone, they would be able to afford their health care. And it was this thing of like, okay, here's somebody in need, and who's to blame? And, let's point the finger at somebody, and essentially blaming poor people for being in need. And I read this story where Jesus's disciples are asking him, like, who's to blame that this person's in need? And Jesus is just like, nobody's to blame. You just need to help him.
Yeah.
I've seen so much in conservative politics that is about trying to figure out who's to blame and pointing the finger at people and blaming them for the situation they're in. And again, that just was not at all the approach I saw in Jesus.
Yeah, rationalizing why this person doesn't deserve our help.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And then you layer on top of that, like just the straight up teachings of Jesus when it comes to, caring for widows and orphans, visiting prisoners, all of this stuff, like, you read Matthew 25 and you go like, wow, maybe Jesus like cares about some of these social issues, and we need to do it. And then, what's interesting, and I'm talking a lot here, but one of the other things that kind of broke from me was kind of the argument that, it's not the government's job to help people.
Yeah.
It's the church's job to help people. And, I wrote about, this is my second shameless plug for a book that I've written. I wrote about this a bit in my book called Running for Our Lives, which is a story of when I ran for Congress. The average church in America is 70 people. That's the average size of a church in America. When you begin to do the math, if those 70 people maybe represent 40 families, the average annual income for a family is something like $65,000 or something. I can't remember the exact number now. And then if you go like, okay, if everybody tithes, then the average church budget per year in America is something like $260,000. If everybody's giving 10%, and just kind of like laying out the averages. And then you look at, okay, what if one person in that congregation gets cancer? Can that church take care of that person? And the average cost of cancer treatment is well over $260,000 in a year. Mm-hmm. And that's just one person.
Right.
What happens if two people get cancer?
Yeah.
Or if the neighbor of somebody in the congregation gets cancer? Like it is ridiculous and untenable.
Such a cop-out, yeah.
Yes, to say, well, the government shouldn't do it, the church will. Well, come on. Like it's just not realistic. And there's a lot of other reasons why, like, politics and how we structure our community and paying taxes and, to have services is all important. And this whole approach of like demonizing governmental help, because the church will take care of it.
Yeah.
Well, that's just not pragmatic. That's just not going to work.
Yeah. And it's really frustrating to me that when it comes to things like same-sex marriage, that's when Republicans will push their beliefs on all of society and say government needs to step in here and prevent this from happening. But when it comes to helping people, that's the church's job, and we don't want to make people help others.
Yeah.
It's just this bizarre double standard where when it comes to aiding others, doing the thing that Jesus said to do, we find reasons not to do it.
Yeah. And there's, we've seen over the last couple of weeks where I think the number's up to 23 now. 23 states are ending the additional federal aid that's available to unemployed people in their states. So the federal government through September has approved an extra $300 for people who are unemployed. And I think it's 23 states, including Arkansas, where I live, have ended that early. And basically the federal government is saying,
don't give us that money.
Yes, don't give us this money to distribute to people in need. And it's just like, wait a minute, what? Yeah. And I mean, we've come to the point now where we're saying that Arkansas is being run by a group of people who think that they're running a large private Christian school, and they're like, they're putting like the same mandates on our state as what like you'd find in like a conservative evangelical Christian school. Yeah, it's really
the other thing is, growing up, I was taught so much to take the Bible seriously, even literally, to take the Bible literally when it says don't do these things. But when Jesus says feed these people, well, let's pump the brakes a little here, guys.
That's right. That's right.
When Jesus says sell all of your belongings and give to the poor, whoa, that's more of a metaphor. It's like,
yeah.
Well, which is it? Should I take this guy seriously or not?
Yeah. Well, hopefully folks have found this conversation interesting or helpful, whether you're in your own political transformation or you've got people in your life that either are in the midst of it, or you're hoping will end up going through some kind of political transformation. Hopefully this stuff is helpful. Thank you for being with us on Facebook Live and Apple Podcasts and all the places where you can listen to these podcasts. Make sure you tune in tomorrow for the Vote Common Good Faith podcast. And then on Thursday is issues. Dan, do you have issues that you're talking about on Thursday?
All the issues.
All of the issues. We have issues. And then on Friday, we end with the week with science and economics. And so there's all sorts of things to talk about. Maybe we need to have Fadl Kaboob on to explain cryptocurrency and NFTs to us, Dan.
That would be awesome.
we might need to make that happen. Our favorite economist, Fadl Kaboob. So thank you all for being with us. And, of course, check out votecommongood.com, to find out all about the We the People ride. While you're there, don't miss the donate button. We would appreciate that, and encourage you to have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week.
Bye, everybody.